The streets glowed under the soft haze of Christmas lights, snowflakes swirling like forgotten wishes in the wind. Clara Mitchell tightened her scarf against the biting cold, her breath forming tiny clouds in the air as she hurried past laughing couples and bustling shoppers. It was Christmas Eve, and the world seemed wrapped in warmth, everyone but the hunched figure she barely noticed on the park bench ahead. Something about him made her pause. Maybe it was the way he sat perfectly still, as if time had abandoned him there. Or maybe it was the untouched sandwich trembling in his frail hands, the wrapper peeling back like a half-hearted gift. Clara had spent 12 hours on her feet at the hospital, tending to patients who would spend the holidays hooked to machines, their families clinging to hope. She was exhausted. She should have been home by now, curled up with hot cocoa, letting the season's joy sink in. But as she glanced at the old man again, something tugged at her, a quiet, insistent pull she couldn't ignore. His coat was too thin for the weather, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. And then, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was enough. There was a loneliness in his stare so deep it sent a shiver down her spine. Clara had seen that look before in the faces of those who had outlived everyone they loved. Without thinking, she adjusted her bag, her fingers brushing the still warm container of food inside. It was just a simple meal, nothing special. But as she stepped toward him, she had no idea that this small act of kindness would unravel a secret so chilling. It would haunt her long after the snow melted. The crunch of snow under her boots was the only sound as Clara approached the bench. Up close, the man looked even more fragile, his knuckles bony and red from the cold, his silver stubble catching the flicker of streetlights. He didn't speak as she sat beside him, just stared ahead like a ghost trapped between memories. "It's freezing out here," Clara said, her voice gentle. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." The man's hands trembled around the sandwich, but he made no move to eat it. A stale gift from some hurried stranger, she guessed. Without another word, she unzipped her bag and pulled out the foil-wrapped container. Roasted chicken, buttery mashed potatoes, glazed carrots still steaming faintly. Hospital cafeteria food, but better than nothing. "Here," she said, holding it out. "It's not much, but it's hot." For a long moment he didn't react. Then slowly his gaze drifted to the food, then up to her face. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, clouded with something deeper than age, grief maybe, or guilt. "You're kind," he finally muttered, his voice rough as gravel. "Too kind." Clara smiled, nudging the container closer. "It's Christmas. Nobody should go hungry." He hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing hers, ice cold and shaking. The contact sent an odd prickle down her arm like static before a storm. Something about him felt heavy, not just sad but burdened. "Harold," he said abruptly, as if forcing the name out. "Harold Whitmore." "Clara," she replied. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight, Harold? A shelter or—" "I'm fine," he cut in, sharper than she expected. Then quieter, just needed air. She studied him, the frayed cuffs of his coat, the way his breath hitched when he shifted. This wasn't just needing air. This was a man who'd been sitting in the cold for hours, maybe longer. Before she could press further, Harold lifted the fork she'd tucked inside the container, his hand pausing midair. His throat worked like he was swallowing words instead of food. Then, so soft she almost missed it. "You remind me of someone." Clara blinked, "Oh." But Harold didn't elaborate, just took a slow bite, his eyes drifting past her shoulder toward the shadowed trees beyond the park, as if something or someone was waiting there, watching. And that's when she noticed it, the way his breath fogged the air in uneven bursts, not from the cold. From fear. Clara watched as Harold chewed mechanically, his gaze locked on some distant point behind her. The park had grown quieter, the festive chatter of passers-by fading into an eerie hush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She should leave, she knew that. Her shift started early tomorrow and the cold was seeping through her coat, but something in Harold's hollow stare pinned her to the bench. "You said I remind you of someone," she ventured, trying to sound casual. Harold's fork clattered against the container. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then with sudden urgency, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was shockingly strong, his skin papery but unyielding. Clara's pulse leapt. This close, she could smell the damp wool of his coat, the faint sourness of old grief clinging to him. His lips parted. "You look just like her, my daughter." The words slithered into the space between them, freezing Clara's breath in her lungs. His voice wasn't just quiet, it was broken, the sound of a man who hadn't spoken that name in decades. Before she could react, Harold recoiled as if burned, releasing her so abruptly she swayed forward. Wait! But he was already standing, the food tumbling to the snow. His chair screeched against the pavement, loud as a scream in the stillness. Clara reached for him, her fingers grazing empty air as he stumbled back. Harold, it's okay, I just... He shook his head wildly, eyes darting past her again to the skeletal trees. No, no, I shouldn't have. A wet cough racked his frame. When he looked back at her, his face was a mask of something worse than sadness. Terror. Then he was moving, shuffling away with jerky, uneven steps. Clara stood, her medical instincts warring with the unease coiling in her gut. Let me help you get home, she called after him. Harold didn't turn, just hunched deeper into his coat, his whisper carrying back on the wind. She died on a night like this. And then he was gone, swallowed by the swirling snow. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her wrist still tingling where he'd gripped her. Around her, Christmas lights blurred into smears of color. That whisper, those 7 words, they weren't just sorrowful. They were a confession, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her roommate, "You coming home?" Clara stared at the empty path where Harold had vanished. No, she realized, not yet. The hospital cafeteria coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, but Clara gulped it anyway, her eyes scanning the local newspaper archives on her laptop. Sleep had been impossible after last night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Harold's haunted face, heard that rasping whisper, "You look just like her, my daughter." The clock above the nurse's station ticked towards 7 a.m., but she barely noticed. Her first stop had been the park at dawn, hoping to find Harold. Only frozen footprints remained, leading toward the derelict east side of town. Now, between patients, she scoured decades-old news articles, typing Harold Whitmore and missing daughter with fingers that shook slightly. The third search result made her choke on her coffee. Lillian Whitmore, 19, disappears on Christmas Eve 1982. The black and white photo showed a girl with high cheekbones and wide-set eyes. Clara's own features stared back at her. Her stomach lurched. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was like looking at a vintage photograph of herself. The article gave sparse details. Lillian had argued with her father at a holiday party, stormed out into a snowstorm, and never returned. No body found. No suspects. Clara, you okay? She slammed the laptop shut as her colleague, Raj, leaned over the counter, his brow furrowed at her pale face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just holiday fatigue, she lied, tucking the computer under her arm. Her lunch break was almost up, but she needed one more stop. The bell above Mr. Delaney's convenience store jingled as she entered. The elderly shopkeeper squinted at her from behind thick glasses. Help you, miss. Clara pulled up the article on her phone. Do you remember this family, the Whitmores? Mr. Delaney's wrinkled hand stilled on the counter. A shadow passed over his face. Course I do. Lillian used to buy peppermints here after school. He lowered his voice. That poor girl, and Harold, he was never right after. After what exactly? The old man wiped the counter needlessly. After they searched the river, after the police stopped knocking, he'd come in here some nights buying the same peppermints, talking to himself. He leaned closer, smelling of pipe tobacco. Last winter, I found him out back going through my dumpster, said he was waiting for the snow to give her back. Clara's throat tightened. Where does he live now? Abandoned mill apartments on Elm. But listen, Mr. Delaney grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. That place, people say they hear things. Harold's not the only one who's lost someone. The warning sat heavy in her chest as she drove toward Elm Street after her shift. The old textile mill loomed against the twilight, its broken windows like empty eye sockets. Someone had spray-painted "Go away" across the boarded-up entrance. Clara's phone flashlight trembled as she picked through the debris-strewn stairwell. The smell of mildew and something sharper, ammonia, burned her nose. Second floor, apartment 2B. The door hung slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The apartment was freezing, barely furnished, just a cot, a hot plate, and photos. Dozens of them taped haphazardly across every wall. All of Lillian. School portraits, candid shots, even grainy newspaper clippings. In the center, a shrine. A small table with a snow globe, a hairbrush, and a single peppermint wrapper, perfectly preserved. Her pulse roared in her ears. This wasn't just grief. This was obsession. A floorboard creaked behind her. Clara whirled around, flashlight illuminating the doorway. Empty. But on the floor near her feet lay something new, a yellowed envelope freshly placed. Her name was written on it in shaky cursive. Inside, a single Polaroid photo. Lillian, eyes wide with fear, standing in this very apartment. And scrawled on the back in red ink, "She's still here when it snows." The Polaroid slipped from Clara's fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. Her breath came in short, visible bursts as she stared at the photo, Lillian's terrified face, the peeling wallpaper behind her identical to what still clung to these rotting walls. The date scribbled in the corner confirmed it, December 24, 1982, the night she disappeared. A draft snaked through the apartment, making the photos on the walls tremble. Clara's flashlight flickered. Clicking. The sound came from the hallway, a deliberate step on creaking floorboards. "Harold," her voice sounded too loud in the suffocating silence. No answer, just the wind whistling through broken windows. Swallowing hard, Clara bent to pick up the photo, her fingers brushing against something cold beneath it. A key, tarnished silver with a tiny L engraved on the bow. Lillian's key. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just Harold's apartment, it was hers. The truth unfolded in her mind with horrifying clarity. The untouched sandwich at the park, Lillian's favorite maybe, the peppermint wrapper on the shrine, Mr. Delaney had said she bought them, the way Harold had stared at Clara with that awful mixture of longing and dread. She was standing in a tomb. A floorboard groaned directly outside the door. Clara's body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged for the nearest hiding place, the narrow closet beside the shrine. The door stuck as she yanked it shut, leaving a half-inch gap to peer through. The smell of mothballs and old wool filled her nose. Footsteps entered the apartment, slow, methodical. Harold's worn boots came into view, pausing just inches from the closet. Through the gap, Clara watched as he picked up the Polaroid she'd dropped, his gnarled fingers tracing Lillian's face. "I know you're here," he murmured, not angry, resigned. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, her pulse hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Harold shuffled to the shrine, placing the photo beside the snow globe. When he turned, the flashlight beam caught his face, and Clara stifled a gasp. Tears streaked his weathered cheeks. "You look so much like her," he whispered to the empty room, "but you're not my Lillian, she's—" His voice broke. "She's still waiting for me to say I'm sorry." A metallic clink made Clara's breath catch. Harold had pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, rusted handgun. Time slowed. He pressed the barrel to his temple. "No," Clara burst from the closet without thinking, sending the door crashing against the wall. Harold whirled, the gun swinging wildly. For one heart-stopping second it pointed directly at her chest. Then recognition flooded his face and his arm dropped. "You," he breathed, "why did you come here?" Clara's entire body trembled, but she forced herself to step forward. "I found the photo. I know about Lillian." Her voice softened. "What happened to her, Harold?" The gun clattered to the floor. Harold sank onto the cot like a marionette with cut strings. When he spoke, his words were barely audible. "We fought that night. She wanted to leave town with that boy." His hands twisted in his lap. "I grabbed her arm too hard, she fell." A choked sob escaped him. "The ice on the river, it cracked." Clara's knees nearly gave out. The river. The searches Mr. Delaney mentioned. All these years, Harold had known exactly where his daughter was. And he'd done nothing. Outside, the first snowflakes of another Christmas Eve began to fall. The wind howled through the broken windows, swirling snowflakes across the apartment floor like ashes. Harold didn't move from the cot, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his confession. Clara stood frozen, the key still clutched in her hand, Lillian's key, cold as the river that had taken her. "You left her there," Clara whispered, not a question, an accusation. Harold's breath hitched. "I tried. The current was too strong. By morning the ice had sealed her in." His fingers dug into his knees. "Every winter when the snow comes, I hear her knocking beneath the surface." A chill crawled up Clara's spine. The shrine, the photos. This wasn't just guilt. It was madness festering for 40 years. She edged toward the door, suddenly aware of how alone they were in this decaying building. The gun glinted on the floor between them. Harold followed her gaze. "I won't stop you," he said hoarsely. "Call the police. Tell them where to find my girl." His eyes met hers, brimming with a terrible clarity. "But first, there's something else." He reached under the cot and pulled out a water-stained journal, its pages warped with age. When he held it out, Clara hesitated before taking it. The cover smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Blood. The first page was dated December 25, 1982, Christmas Day. Harold's handwriting sprawled across it in frantic strokes. I tried to go back. The ice is too thick. Lillian keeps singing our song under the river. She says I have to wait until the next snowfall. Clara flipped through the pages, each entry more unhinged than the last. Harold describing Lillian's voice in the pipes, her face in the frost patterns. Then near the end, a passage that made her stomach drop. The snow globe woman told me the truth today. Lillian won't come home until I bring her a replacement, someone who looks like her, someone kind. Clara's head snapped up. What is this? Harold's expression shattered. I never meant. A deafening crack cut him off. The apartment lights flickered on with a buzzing hum. Clara hadn't even realized there was power. The single bare bulb swung overhead, casting erratic shadows, and in those shadows, movement. Near the shrine, the snow globe trembled. Inside, the tiny winter village began to swirl despite no one touching it. The cheerful holiday tune it played was distorted, sluggish, like a record left in the rain. Harold made a wounded noise. She's here. Clara backed toward the door, but her heel hit something soft. A woman's scarf. Red wool. Freshly damp. The journal fell from her hands as the temperature plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the walls, forming words in jagged cursive. Daddy PRMSD me a friend. Harold let out a sob. I'm sorry, Lillian, she's not for you. He lurched toward Clara, but not to stop her, to push her toward the exit. Run. The snow globe exploded. Shards of glass embedded themselves in the walls as a gale-force wind erupted in the apartment. The photos of Lillian tore free, swirling in a cyclone around them, and beneath the howling wind. Giggling. High-pitched. Happy. Clara didn't remember reaching the stairwell. She stumbled down blindly, Harold's journal still clutched to her chest. Behind her, the door to 2B slammed shut with finality. Then silence. Panting on the sidewalk outside, Clara looked up at the mill. The broken window of Harold's apartment was dark again. And perfectly still. Her hands shook as she opened the journal to the last written page. There, in handwriting that was Harold, was a new message. Thank you for the new friend, Daddy. She sings pretty. Clara's blood turned to ice. Because taped to the opposite page was a lock of auburn hair. The exact shade of her own. The police found Harold Whitmore's body on New Year's Day. Clara read the article 3 times, her coffee going cold on the diner counter. Apparent suicide, it said. No foul play suspected. The photo showed the mill apartments cordoned off with yellow tape, officers milling about with bored expressions. There was no mention of Lillian, no mention of the snow globe shards embedded in the walls like jagged teeth. She traced the edge of Harold's journal, hidden now beneath her mattress, and tried not to think about the lock of hair tucked inside. Her hair. The waitress refilled her cup with a sympathetic smile. Rough holiday. Clara forced a nod. Outside, the first snowfall since Christmas Eve dusted the sidewalks. She stopped wearing red. Stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. But last night, when the pipes in her apartment had groaned like a girl humming a lullaby, she'd slept with the lights on. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the local news. Crews to drain Mill River for redevelopment project next week. The spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering against the porcelain. Suddenly she was back in that crumbling apartment, Harold's broken voice in her ears. The ice had sealed her in. A shadow fell across the newspaper. Clara looked up into the familiar face of Mr. Delaney, his wool cap dusted with snow. Without asking, he slid into the booth across from her. You went to see him, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Clara's throat tightened. Did you know all these years? The old man stirred sugar into his coffee with deliberate slowness. Nobody wanted to believe, not even the cops. He met her eyes. But the mill girls used to whisper, said they'd seen a girl in a red scarf skating on the thinnest ice every winter. A chill crept up Clara's spine, and Harold. Haunted, Mr. Delaney's knuckles whitened around his mug. After the first year, he started buying 2 of everything, peppermints, mittens, like he was still shopping for her. He leaned forward. But last week he came in and bought just one candy cane, said she won't need them where she's going. The river, the dredging. Clara's breath fogged the window as she turned to watch the snow fall harder. Somewhere out there, heavy machinery was preparing to crack open 40 years of frozen secrets. She should have felt relief, closure. But all she could think about was the last page of Harold's journal, the one she hadn't shown the police. The Polaroid stuck to the back cover, taken some time after Clara had fled the apartment. Harold slumped against the shrine, and beside him, a blurry figure in a red scarf, holding hands with a second, indistinct shape. A shape with Clara's auburn hair. The bell above the diner door jingled as Mr. Delaney left, letting in a gust of wind that sent the newspaper fluttering to the floor. Clara didn't pick it up. She just watched the snow swirl outside, thicker now, almost like dancing. And when the waitress came to clear the booth an hour later, she found the coffee untouched. A single peppermint left on the saucer, and the window fogged with a single word, already melting away. Soon,